are walking a path of recovery. Most life becomes one of recovering from some traumatic event or another. We are human. Life is hard. I can guarantee most of us sitting here in front of the screen have experienced one, if not a plethora of traumatic life events. Therefore, we have this compensatory default where we lean on things to resolve our pain, whether that's leaning on a substance or leaning on a person or leaning on a behavior. The list is forever long, and no diet will ever fix all of that. And what I started to see is that people are singing Carnivore's praises as if it resolves everything in life, and we just have to get really real.
I wanted to let you in on how things have changed in the kitchen. So when I got home from yoga today, I made a bowl of frozen blueberries and whole milk A2 yogurt while I also prepped this egg scramble. I used 2 whole eggs and 3 whites, and I reserved the other 3 yolks to make ice cream, which I'll show you in just a moment. And then I added some vegan kimchi. The only reason I chose vegan kimchi was because the other brands had some MSG in it, and I just wanted to keep it clean. But this is a really nice, wholesome, and filling breakfast. And then after recording this video, I prepared some baked cod. So I took 2 wild fillets I got from Costco, and I drizzled with olive oil and sea salt and chopped up some fresh dill. This was about a half of a bunch. And then I baked it in a 350-degree oven for 30 minutes, and then went about recording, and then it was done. So we went to the beach really briefly this afternoon for a birthday party, and when we came home, I took that cooled down fish and chopped up some cucumber and yellow bell pepper and added everything to the bowl. So because it was already dressed with the dill and olive oil and pepper and salt, I just added some avocado oil mayonnaise and some apple cider vinegar and mixed it all together. So this was a really, really delicious, high protein, nourishing lunch, and I had 2 bowls of it. So then to make the ice cream, we are measuring 1 cup of heavy whipping cream. This is just going to be for a small portion because I only had 3 yolks. So you whip the whipping cream like you would make it for any dish, and then I'm adding the 3 reserved egg yolks from breakfast. And then I added 2 teaspoons of coffee extract, and then whatever allulose I had left. It was probably maybe 2 tablespoons. So I used maybe another tablespoon of maple syrup just to make sure that it was sweet, and then a little pinch of sea salt. And I'm going to blend to incorporate this all together, not to try to achieve a whipped cream texture. That's good to remember, because if you did, it would come out like butter, and that's not what you want. So once this was blended and incorporated, I poured it into this jar, and I will let it freeze until tomorrow.
Okay, good day, everybody. It's Saturday, and I actually meant to start my day with some vlogging from the beginning, but as I was 3/4 of the way through my coffee, I realized, well, I didn't get the first bits. So I'm going to show you just kind of how I start a typical day. These days, you know, my coffee is anywhere between coconut oil and some raw honey, or some A2 milk and some raw honey, or some heavy cream and some raw honey. But no matter what I am allowing myself and deeply enjoying these days is the inclusion of some sweetness in my coffee. Some people like stevia, some people like allulose, some people like butter and egg yolks, and to each their own. I think one of the things that I really missed when I went through or endeavored to be the perfect carnivore was to lose all affinity for the sweet taste. And I am having quite the love affair with raw honey. That's no more than a spoonful, but just mentioning out loud that I've really been enjoying that inclusion again. And maybe that should be just kind of a segue into allowances, dogmatism, giving myself permission, and ultimately where I'm at today with honing in what I believe will be a skill that I can use to help. So one thing that I noticed right from the get-go when I started the carnivore journey was there is a deep need for a therapeutic approach, because it's become a very all or nothing, black and white generalization that everyone needs carnivore. And I know that there are some more well-rounded thinkers out there, but there are also the people who are very straight and narrow. This is the only path. And I have to say that in the beginning, I utilized the defense mechanism of black and white, all or nothing thinking to just keep me committed to carnivore. And I think I needed that. And I think it behooved me for the 100 days that I gave the lifestyle. That said, there came a point where when you're living in your defense mechanisms, it starts to detract from what makes the world a very beautiful and colorful place. So many of you know I am no longer doing strict carnivore. It served its purpose, but nothing has rung more true for me that it was a short-term solution for a long-term goal. And what carnivore does is it attracts a lot of addicts. And whether or not you're addicted to heroin or sugar, the seeking of pleasure, the avoidance of pain, and the conservation of energy is what makes an addict an addict. And the good and the bad news is that all humans are addicts to some extent. Whether or not you go so far as to ruin your life in pursuit of the substance, all humans, all brains seek pleasure, avoid pain, and conserve energy. It's just to what extent do you do that? And I really started to notice, wow, carnivore has this way of pulling in the addict and the human in all of us, because we're so inclined to tip the scale a little too much. I did, the highly supplemented, plant-based protein, high starch, high carbohydrate, low fat, high volume way of eating and living until about, a year ago, I started to feel something's not right. And it could have been two things. And this is why all bodies and all lifestyles and all circumstances are so unique. So we really have to come back and own our experience here. But I had gotten breast implants in 2.5 years ago on my 40th birthday. And it wasn't until about a year ago that I was like, gosh, I've got some kind of inflammation going on in my body. And I was landing myself in the hospital with various ailments like the flu, basic stuff. And for somebody with a really high tolerance for pain, I've had natural births, I've got lots of tattoos. The first thought was, could this be my breast implants? Because the last thing I would ever done is question my diet. So I had been in the rabbit hole of researching explant surgery and trying to resolve this feeling of overall kind of it's low-grade inflammation. It's not like I can't live my life, but it was just kind of I'm not feeling like myself. And so when I stumbled upon carnivore and the concept of just foregoing all carbohydrates and then seeing people thrive and recover from all of the things that they were dealing with, whether it was chronic psychological pain like the Petersons or chronic physical pain like people who have recovered from autoimmune conditions, it really made me scratch my head and think, well, maybe there's something in that for me. So as soon as I started carnivore, all of the symptoms that I thought were a result of the breast implants resolved themselves. I felt incredible, especially after the first, second, and third week. And then after 30 days, it was a cascade of oxalate dumping, probably keto flu, some fat adaptation, and all kinds of other things. And then I started gaining weight. So I gave it a valiant 100 days. And then I concluded that whether or not my vegan diet was in total vein or had some faults to it, which I'm sure to an extent it did, it boils down to I'm going to get my breast implants removed and see if that just gets rid of some of the low-grade inflammation that I'm experiencing. Which brings me to the ultimate point that we need to remember that carnivore is not a panacea. And I see in the comments, we want there to be a God in a diet. And if you've ever leaned on any kind of diet as if it resolved all of your life's woes and then came to realize, well, shit, you still have your bills to pay, you still have your relationships to deal with, you still got to be a great parent, you still have to be available, you still have to show up for your work, you've got pets, you've got a household, you've got a garage, you've got a refrigerator, you've got things that you need to take care of, you've got goals to pursue, investments to show up for. The list is forever long, and no diet will ever fix all of that. And what I started to see is that people are singing carnivore's praises as if it resolves everything in life. And we just have to get really real with ourselves and admit that carnivore is one thing. It's a remembrance that we had an ancestral approach to eating at one point, and we diverted from that path in modern big food and big pharma and forgot who we are in essence as a living, breathing, human functioning being in this world. And we have to take care of our vessel first and foremost. That's kind of all that I see carnivore is. And now it's a trend, and now it's this big thing that's blown up, and everybody talks about it as if it is a panacea. And it's just simply so far from the truth. I mean, so many people fall onto carnivore because they want to lose some weight. They want to feel good in their life. They want to show up for their commitments, right? And carnivore is not the only way to do that, but getting rid of inflammation will definitely help you to do that. So this is the whole thing with short-term solution, long-term vision, and long-term goal. Peace and freedom, and I tell this to, sorry, the trash man's out. Peace and freedom is your destination. If you're an addict, especially, but even if you're just a human, you are walking a path of recovery. Most life becomes one of recovering from some traumatic event or another. We are human. Life is hard. I can guarantee most of us sitting here in front of the screen have experienced one, if not a plethora of traumatic life events. And therefore, we have this compensatory default where we lean on things to resolve our pain, whether that's leaning on a substance or leaning on a person or leaning on a behavior. But either way, this becomes a path of recovery. And what we forget is that we're not here to stay in the recovery. We're here to achieve the peace and freedom. And one of the ways that we forget to do that is we make diets or we make lifestyles the almighty God and forget that the one upstairs, whether or not you believe in a biblical God or an all creator or just the stars and the dust and the cosmos, no matter what you believe in, that there's something greater than us in charge, and our peace and our freedom is not reliant upon one sole thing, whether you eat beef or pork or eggs or tofu or kimchi or apples. Like we've got to get really, really real with ourselves. So the therapeutic approach to this is once you give it your all, and I think a level amount of discipline and devotion and dedication is absolutely warranted. I am proud of the discipline that I instilled in my path, and I'm also proud of myself for recognizing through discernment when it was time to stop. And for me, it was time to stop when I could not muster the energy to do the things that I love. I decided to go back to yoga. I am a registered yoga teacher. I got my training back in like 2006, and I was teaching when I lived on Kauai, and then I had babies, and I pursued my master's in marriage and family therapy. And I've always held this yoga practice in my soul and in my spirit, but I didn't pursue teaching. So I got back to the yoga studio to just kind of remember who it is that I am. And in the first few practices, noticing that I wasn't really moving with the kind of fluidity that is so inherent in my body and in my practice, I was like, I really need to do something about that. And a lot of that was some self-reflection on, well, what's standing between me and having the yoga practice that has always sung so true to my heart and helps me to feel connected to a higher power. And honestly, it was a bare bones physiological get real moment where I was like, I am eating way too much fat. I'm not deriving any energy from this. So I started tracking, and I reduced the amount of fat that I was eating in my carnivore diet, and I wasn't adding butter to everything, and I wasn't eating, 80-20 ground beef anymore. Increased the amount of protein, and then dabbled with some carbohydrates. And all of a sudden, the light bulbs went back on in my brain, and I started to feel better, more motivated, and mentally clear. So I kind of pulled myself out of this like hardcore, I gotta carnivore harder mentality, and just intuited. I just listened. And one thing that yoga taught me, my practice taught me 20 years ago was discernment is your best friend and your confidant. And that is something that we cultivate when we show up for something mindful. Going back to something familiar that brought me joy reminded me that I'm here not in pursuit of the perfect diet, but in pursuit of really living my life to the fullest. And I totally respect people who are leaning on carnivore, who wake up every day happy to eat meat and eggs or no eggs and just do the lion thing, or whatever, BBBE, whatever works for you. I think that that's great. And I'm so glad that that's really, really helping people. And if you have reached your end of the carnivore journey only to realize that you needed to make some modifications and to pivot, and then you experience shame or guilt or fear of rejection in doing that, I am here to say, you're okay. Like, I am in your corner. We're all in this together. I have a hard time subscribing to something that right now is driven by more dogma than it is just let's help people and move on and continue healing. And I don't think that that's everyone in the carnivore community, but it's a lot of the kind of purist, zealot attitude that you see very pervasive in the carnivore community. I mean, the last thing that we ever want to do is subscribe to something that feels like I hate to say it, but like a cult or divisive. You know, we don't want this to be a political debate. We want this to be how to experience more joy and love and connection and light in your life so that you can, again, pursue the things that you love. So back to the whole recovery is the path that you get to peace and freedom, and whether or not that path, you know, stops at, oh, I'm going to have an apple today or some avocado, and remembering clearly the difference between, we cannot put carbohydrates under this umbrella of like Kraft mac and cheese and chocolate chip muffins in the same breath as we do pears and watermelon. It's just not fair to do that, because the body receives the carbohydrates and the glucose from the watermelon and pear so much more efficiently than it does a refined product like Kraft mac and cheese. Makes sense? Something that I'm giving myself the permission to do is to talk about weight. And I am not coming from hundreds of pounds of weight loss, and I'm not coming from 60 pounds of weight gain. I am just coming to you as a woman who has lived inside her body, and I haven't fluctuated a lot throughout my life. And I've applied some pretty basic disciplinary things with lots of freedom and wiggle room throughout my life to do that. And I want to share with you that it's not a matter of militancy in order to maintain, but there are some things like deficits that come in handy, some indulgences, whether that's, you know, for some people that might be a glass of wine if you can tolerate alcohol, but I wouldn't recommend that necessarily, or someone who can have ice cream with their family one night but not let that become a little tin of Pringles the next day. You won't get anywhere too far too fast if you are just a militant a-hole. Once your body reaches a place of safety, which means you're feeding it consistently, you're supporting your metabolism, you're not starving yourself. Starvation leads to binging anyway, so you've got to understand that if you are eating 1,000 calories throughout the day and then wondering why at 6, 7, 9, 10 p.m. at night you're ravenous and can't sleep, it's likely because you haven't eaten enough in the front end of your day. So there's that. But once you have gone into enough of a deficit that you can maintain to support your metabolism, which is why this is a one step at a time, one day at a time process, and it's not going to happen overnight. If it took you 5 years to gain 100 pounds, it's not going to take you 5 days to lose it, right? Consistency is going to be your best friend. Your hunger will also be your best friend. And one thing that I really missed when I was carnivore was like, oh my God, I'm eating literally my whole day's calories in one sitting, and I'm not feeling hungry, but I'm still gaining weight. I really had to question it there, because I have worked really hard to befriend my hunger, to make friends with this beckoning that my body gives me to say, hey, I could have an apple and, you know, some kimchi and some soft-boiled eggs or some sliced turkey, or in the past when I was vegan, I could have some tofu and some papaya seed dressing and some carrots, like whatever the beckoning was, but to stoke the fire a little bit throughout the day. And I'm not saying go on and graze if grazing doesn't work for you, but to consistently feed your appetite and your metabolism, and then to put the food down at the end of the day, knowing that you've nourished yourself with love and attention. That is something that I'll get more into in future videos. But for the sake of weight and weight management, if there is one thing that I have instilled throughout my entire life is to go by how my body feels and to make sure that I'm doing the bare minimum. And whether or not you're somebody who likes to eat one meal or 3 or 4 meals a day, you want to walk away from those meals feeling satisfied. If you're 130 pounds and you want to weigh 125 pounds and you've got 5 pounds to lose, then being in a small caloric deficit, let's say 1700 calories, what does that look like? What do you gravitate towards? Where can I cut some corners and still feel nourished? And then at the end of the day, you realize, wow, I actually had to eat quite a bit of food to make it to 1700 calories. And then you realize that you're approaching this entire process with curiosity, which is also your best friend. So maintaining your weight is ultimately going to be the biggest challenge of all. It won't even be the weight loss, which leaves me last little note here is we think that happiness is the goal, but yoga teaches us that contentment is the goal. Peace is the goal, right? Feeling at one with our life and our body. That is the removal of these defense mechanisms. When we can breathe into our body and say, I'm in a good place today, right? And it's no one thing's fault, and I'm gonna do what I have to do to be honest and true to myself. Okay, so my timer's going off. I'm gonna go take the cod out of the oven and I will bid you adieu for now, but we'll continue the conversation. Okay, aloha.